All right, it is good to be back with you tonight, today, whatever. I guess it is nighttime here. Been a while, but we are glad to be back. We thought today we would look at Yngwie Malmsteen. Now, I'm probably a little bit partial, maybe even a little bit defensive, just due to the fact that he is my favorite guitar player. I have a lot of guys that I like to listen to, a lot of them that I just really love and think they're absolutely amazing. But for my ear and for my taste, Yngwie is the man. So thought we'd maybe just look at some general observations concerning him. You think about all of these players that have had such an impact over the years on the world of guitar. In particular, the big ones I think are Jimi Hendrix, so far ahead of his time. Great tone, great performer, great everything, just absolutely amazing. Can still listen to him with as much satisfaction as anybody else that I could ever listen to. And then, 10, 12 years later, a guy by the name of Eddie Van Halen comes along. You talk about rewriting the book. It was amazing when you heard Eruption for the first time and you're thinking, is that an organ? What's going on? It was just so amazing and just redefined and challenged and raised the bar for guitar players everywhere, I think. And so you think, well, that can't go any higher. I mean, everybody's trying to be an Eddie clone at that point. Everybody's tapping. You could see other players that were influenced by him, that were on the scene, that were very successful as well. I think we've talked about them in the past. But then, 82, 83, whenever it was, 81, I don't know, whenever the demo came over to Mike Varney for the Spotlight column in Guitar Player magazine. And here you had this recorded on a little cassette deck of some sort. Maybe you had a 4-track, I don't know. I'm sure you've heard it. But I know when I was first introduced to what Yngwie Malmsteen was doing, I was so into Vivian Campbell, and to me he was the greatest guitar player in the world at that point. It changed everything. The level of speed, accuracy, musicality, and his vibrato is second to none. Just an incredible player. So I think a guitar player buddy of mine kind of turned me on to him. And I was like, wow, what is this? What is this? Mix that with the tone, which was just amazing. And it sent me back to the drawing board. What an impact. So I believe I heard the first album, Rising Force. I just couldn't believe what I was hearing. Now you roll the clock up, 35 years later or whatever it is. It almost seems, some of it, I guess, second nature, and it's not as easy to be, you're not as easily impressed now because of how far guitar has come. But I think that can be attributed by and largely really, to what Yngwie brought to the table. It just blew me away. And so then, back then you're buying vinyl, and I think I picked up the Steeler album. And when he does that solo, and he's starting out with the acoustic or the classical, and he is just absolutely tearing it to shreds with such accuracy and articulation, speed, it was just unrivaled. Now, some might say, well, he borrowed and stole everything from Uli John Roth and Ritchie Blackmore. Look, there's obviously an influence there. If you listen to Uli John Roth, you're going to hear some stuff. It's like, wow, that kind of sounds like Yngwie. Or Yngwie sounds like him, more appropriately, I think. But he just doesn't have the technique that Yngwie has. Yngwie can just let it go, never stops, can just keep it in that afterburner gear at all times, and he does it with a fire and a passion that to me is quite mesmerizing. So he arrived on the scene, just changed everything. And honestly, the whole thing where you throw the guitar over your back or whatever, like, whoever did it, I think Cinderella and all of those guys, the first person that I ever saw do it was Yngwie. It was just a little 20-second clip on MTV when they actually used to focus on music. And it was Yngwie playing Far Beyond the Sun, some outdoor gig, and at the end of it, he just threw the guitar over his back, and it came back around, and I was sitting there watching it with my brother, and we were like, what just happened? That was amazing. Then I had a chance to see him in 1985 warm up AC/DC. Just incredible. He was apparently sick with the flu. You never would have known it. He just brought it, kicked it, murdered it. It was awesome. Been lucky enough to see him 4 times and meet him twice. Just what a player. I think the perception with Yngwie is that he's some type of a narcissist, some egomaniac, and you probably to a certain extent probably have to be to be that confident in your abilities and to pursue it. But oftentimes I think he's probably a little bit misunderstood. I remember when, I think it was a Guitar World magazine interview with him in the 80s. He was the cover story. It was awesome. And they asked him if he had met Eddie Van Halen. And he said, I think he was at a NAMM show or something. He knew that Eddie was there, and he somehow heard that, or suspected that Eddie knew that he was there. And he said he felt like maybe Eddie avoided him. And he said, and he owned the fact that he could have been wrong, and it may sound like a real arse type thing to say, but he said, I think maybe he was the, reigning guitar hero and maybe felt threatened or something. Like Eddie Van Halen really has no reason to feel threatened. He's, my God, look at what he's brought to the table. But he said this, after he said that, and I'm sure people will focus on, I can't believe he said that. Well, the next thing he said in that paragraph, in the response to that question was, as far as I'm concerned, when Eddie Van Halen came out, there were no other guitar players. So that's who he loved, and that's who he listened to as well. So, you go through the first album, it's just an instrumental. To me, it's a masterpiece. I know some people rag on it. I really don't know why. I guess they're jealous. The second album came out, vocals, more of a rock format rather than just instrumentals, and still very heavy classical influence. But his tone on that second album and first album, to me, were just absolutely amazing. In particular, the title track, Marching Out, does the little fast part at the beginning. But then when it goes into the slow, dreamy part, his tone is so burning. And when I heard I'm a Viking, that opening run he does on the lead, I've never even tried to learn it because it's just why. I'm not very good. I don't have a good ear, and I'm not good at learning other people's stuff. So I just kind of take it and interpret it, I guess. But when he does that ascending just blitz from the low range up into the high on that opening run again on I'm a Viking, whew, man, you talk about melting the fretboard. And so then people start coming out, and it was funny because, I think there was a guy that played for Heaven back in the 80s, kind of looked like Eddie Van Halen, kind of sounded like Eddie Van Halen. You even look at like a Vito Bratta, great player, but, if you didn't have your glasses on and you had bad vision, you're going to be like, that kind of looks like Eddie Van Halen. So Eddie produced his clones. Yngwie produced his clones, in particular Chris and Pelletieri. I remember when his first album came out, it was like, okay, even his vibrato was just so close to Yngwie's, but just not nearly as prolific. Some people think that Pelletieri's faster and all. You get into all of that argument. It doesn't really matter, but I thought he got a little sloppy and a little chunky when he got fast, but he's still a great player. But anyway, I don't want to necessarily give a bunch of details of, we all know what Yngwie has brought to the table. I think it's unfortunate that there are a lot of people that think that he doesn't play with feel, that there's no emotion in his playing. I remember I used to own and operate a little recording studio, and I was recording a group of guys, and we were talking about Yngwie, and he was like one of their spokesperson, if you will. He said, well, there's just not a lot of emotion there. And I wanted to say, really, what track do you think he's not displaying any emotion? Or is there a particular album that there's a song or a vibe that he's not really emotional? Of course, he's not going to be able to answer that question because he doesn't really listen to him. And he just makes what he thinks is an intelligent observation when really he's ignorant of the reality. And I hate to sound so harsh. But I think, and feel free to comment and disagree, love it, love the banter. If you think Yngwie Malmsteen doesn't play with fire, you're just not listening. That vibrato, and he's just snarling all of the time. Just near the end of the Disciples of Hell solo, he just hits that. It's right here. He does it a whole heck of a lot better than that, but it just sounds like a cat that had its tail stepped on. The snarl was just unbelievable. A good friend of mine actually was best man in my wedding, back when I used to be married and such. He was more of a 70s Clapton type guy, but I took those first two albums up for him to listen to, the Rising Force and then Marching Out, and he just couldn't believe it. He just couldn't believe where guitar had gone. And what's amazing is, I know he does tend to repeat himself. We all do. Look at Eddie Van Halen. Good God. Look at Angus Young. Some of their licks, riffs, and even solos are just carbon copies of others that they have already done. So we all fall into that, and maybe you just think you can play the same thing a little bit better in a different context sometimes. But there are those that are critical of Yngwie. And again, I know I'm going to sound like an Yngwie Malmsteen apologist here, It's only because I'm such a fan. I've been following him for so long, and it's never really been it's a disappointment as far as listening to Yngwie. But they say, he's stuck. He hasn't really done anything new. Well, I think you need to step back. I think you need to look and listen. Yeah, it's the same style, but it's not like he's just going to change his style all of a sudden. Angus Young hasn't changed his style. Eddie Van Halen hasn't changed his style. They do what they do. And he does it remarkably well. I saw him back in October of 2017 at the Mercury Ballroom here in Louisville. Tone was impeccable. Technique was impeccable. Everything was absolutely amazing. And, of course, I saw him Generation X, Nashville, Ryman Auditorium, got the VIP package, really fourth row. It was awesome. Zakk Wylde burnt the place down. That was great. Got the pictures with them, autographs, everything. It was just a wonderful, wonderful night. So I do think he's gotten better. I think he's probably as fluid or more fluid than he's ever been. Sometimes his tone, a little bit too much delay, maybe just a little too much overdrive. Seems like he was a little bit cleaner in the early days, but it doesn't matter. He's a fantastic guitar player, and I love to listen to him. Steve Vai said he's probably the most confident guitar player that he's ever met, which is an interesting observation and quite a compliment if you think about it. And also he kind of was inspired by Ritchie Blackmore, I think, as far as like the scallop neck. I guess if you know anything about my story, that about a year and a half ago, I kind of started getting into this scallop neck thing with whatever, with these fake guitars. But I tell you, it's just, once you go scalloped, you're never going to go back, because for me, now I know there can be some intonation problems when recording if your touch is too heavy, but overall, it really lets you just wrestle with the string, and really allows you to dig into it, because I have a tendency, it seems, when I play, for my fingers just to fly off the fretboard sometimes, and the scallop neck kind of prevents that. So I kind of dig it for sure. So one thing was just utterly inspiring, mesmerizing, depressing would be his right hand technique. Now, when you look at Hendrix, you're that type of a thing, and you look at Eddie Van Halen, then you're like, I can't really do Eddie Van Halen, but and you do that right hand thing, I think I'm out of tune. We'll get to that later. You get like Eddie would do his runs like, but with Eddie, that technique is really in his forearm like this. If you watch him, it's really weird. I can't do it. And you look at other people like Vivian Campbell, when he would do his really fast runs, it seemed to be largely in the forearm. And really, my right-hand technique is really right forearm technique. But he would... But with Yngwie, you hear that blistering right-hand technique that is so fast, and correct me if I'm wrong, it seems to be mainly with his thumb and index finger that he's just moving like this. I don't know how in God's name he does it. It's absolutely amazing. And so he introduced us into a world of advanced right-hand technique, sweeping the arpeggios, picking out individual notes of chords, one at a time, not just, like out of tune, but, the whole thing. Saw an interview with Yngwie recently, though, and he said that he does not sweep pick. Now, so I guess someone could take issue with him, but I think when he's doing those arpeggios, I think, in fact, instead of, an upstroke and then downstroking across 5 strings, I think he's picking each note out, which makes it even more impressive. The clarity and the accuracy is off of the charts. Real quick anecdotal thing about Yngwie Malmsteen. I believe there was a guy in the 80s by the name of Tim Fletcher. I think he was a front-of-house engineer or engineered on some Yes albums. I should have done my research. Well, he sponsored some little album, and I think he engineered it, and he brought in Steve Lukather, Alan Holdsworth, Zakk Wylde, and Yngwie Malmsteen. This was in Guitar World magazine, I think, or Guitar Player, one of the two in the 80s. And he said that Alan Holdsworth came in, just kind of blew everybody away with his thing. He said Steve Lukather played what was right for the song. He said Zakk Wylde came in, brought two cases of beer and a couple of stacks of Marshalls, got real screwed up, drunk. Have to watch my language. and they just blazed. And he said, and Yngwie came in, it's where he got the nickname, I think, first. He said they started calling him First Take Yngwie because it was just like, okay, hit record, boom, bam. He just killed it. And he said, I've never seen anyone with as much command over his instrument as Yngwie Malmsteen. So I think he's brought a lot to the table. Again, it's not so much an X and O case study as it is really, it's really more of a perception thing for me, I guess, and talking about the impact that he had on me and what I was exposed to or what I observed and but I know for sure globally, sitting back looking, he changed the game. And anybody who comes out, I don't care who he is, I don't care if it's, Phil Graham or whatever his name is on YouTube, amazing player, Guthrie Govan, amazing player. All of these guys are just off of the charts. But I think they would be kidding us if they denied an influence from Yngwie Malmsteen, just as much as every guitar player, late 70s and the early 80s in rock, outside of like your Angus Young type guys or people that were still holding on to Clapton, they were influenced by Eddie Van Halen. It was inevitable. You can't help it. It's like going to the new great restaurant in the neighborhood. It's just good and you have to go there. And I think Yngwie's influence has lasted just as long. And I think you still see it today. And, you look at like someone, I'm not a big fan, hate to say it, don't mean to be negative, but like someone like Sinister Gates. Sinister Gates is great tone, great player, but, I'm no original mover, shaker, innovator, that's for sure. But I just don't really get a lot of musical stimulation from listening to him. But having said that, he's still heavily influenced by Yngwie, whether he listened to him or not, because at this point it's been so long since Yngwie has been around that now people are being influenced by the people that were influenced. They're being influenced by people who were influenced by Yngwie. So it's now skipped down another generation and a half, I guess. I don't know what defines a generation, but I think you can see those earmarks of his playing in a lot of modern players today. So again, this might be part one, it might be part zero, I don't know. I kind of would like to break down some Yngwie licks and kind of call that the case study part two, more of a detailed look at just a couple of things that make him unique, some techniques, signature riffs, and we might get into those. But with Yngwie, more is more, believe it, love that interview. I think he said he was laying down some tracks for the Steeler album, and the engineer, producer said, hey man, can you back it off a little bit and just don't play so fast all the time. And he's like, what are you talking about? And they said, well, less is more. And you've read the interview or seen the interview on YouTube. It's amazing. And he said, how can that be? How is that even possible? He said, less is not more is more. So I love the fact that he's unapologetic. He just takes it, brings it, does exactly what he wants to do. And for a couple of naysayers out there, it's like, well, Yngwie's not really doing anything. Really? Have you seen his wife? Have you seen his house? Have you seen the collection of Ferraris? Have you seen the collection of guitars? Signature Marshall head, signature Strat. He's amazing. I don't think he's lost a beat. And I hope that we're blessed to hear a lot more to come from the Swedish maestro. Anyway, rock on. We might do a little demonstration here, kind of a neoclassical feel. And then we'll kind of put all this together and maybe put out an addendum or a part two on breaking down maybe a couple of Yngwie licks. Hope that you got something out of it. Feel free to chime in. Tell me something that I don't know, which is pretty much par for the course on most of the case studies that I've done. You don't know everything. You just know what you know and what you've been exposed to. Anyway, rock on. Please like, subscribe, comment, send me a message. Would love to hear from you. Appreciate all the subs. Appreciate all the subscribers and the comments. Channel just keeps going despite a small amount of content from myself. But hey, we've got a lot of other things cooking that are awesome, and we'll be sharing with you down the road as well. So have a good night. Please enjoy. We'll talk to you soon.
Thank